I am so happy to welcome you this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a conversation between our curators this evening, the curators of Across the West and Toward the North, Norwegian and American landscape photography. I am Heidi Leitsky, and I'm the director of the Eckert Art Gallery at Millersville University. And we at Millersville are hosting about one half of this brilliantly curated exhibition. It's a large-scale traveling exhibition. And so I just want to start off and take a moment to acknowledge and thank Susan and Gerald Eckert, who have generously sponsored the Millersville University portion of this exhibition and event. And now it's my honor to introduce this evening's speakers. So our first speaker, or one of the two speakers, is Shannon Egan, and she received her MA and PhD in the history of art from Johns Hopkins University and is the director of Schmucker Art Gallery, pardon me, at Gettysburg College, where she also teaches courses in art history. She is the author of articles on photographers Edward S. Curtis and Jeff Wall. With Anthony Servino, Egan is the co-author of the art book Ejecta from 2015, and since 2018 has collaboratively curated over 20 exhibitions with Servino under the moniker Ejecta Projects. Her research has been supported by the ACLS Terra Foundation for the Arts, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art. Her co-curator, Marthe Fjellestad, trained as an art photographer and holds an MA in critical writing and curatorial practice from Chelsea College of Art, London, and an MA in photographic history and theory from De Montfort University in Leicester, UK. Fjellestad is the academic director at the picture collection at the University of Bergen Library, and from 2020, the curator at, I'm gonna not be able to say this name, the Perspektivet Museum in Norway. She's the co-author of Starman, Sophus Tromholt Photographs 1882 to 1883, and the co-editor with Spencer Acadia of Library and Information Studies for Arctic Social Sciences and Humanities in 2020. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon and Marthe. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you all. Hello, it's nice to see everybody here. And I want to thank Heidi for that lovely introduction. I too share difficulty pronouncing some Norwegian, so sympathize. And I also want to thank Heidi for all of her work installing the exhibition at Eckert Art Gallery in Millersville. For those of you who are first-year students at Gettysburg College, in the chat, there is a link to a Google document, and you are welcome to write your name in that Google Doc, and I hope you'll stick around for the whole lecture this evening. So I want to note that the installations that Heidi mentioned that are at Millersville University and at Gettysburg College right now are two halves of a larger traveling exhibition that will link back up this December and then travel to 2 museums in the United States and then 2 museums in Norway. So not only is this the very first time that some of these stunning, really important American photographs have been shown in central Pennsylvania, this is also the first time that the Norwegian photographs have been exhibited outside of Norway. We're also very excited that an accompanying book will be available from the University of Utah Press this December. And I also just realized that this is the first time that Marthe and I have had the chance to co-present on this project together. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. We'll be going through a PowerPoint presentation. Turn it over to you, Marthe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's our first time, isn't it? That's so exciting. So we also want to thank many institutions and foundations and individuals who've made this exhibition possible. And first, Ron Perisho, who I can see here tonight or this afternoon in your time, who's generously shared his collection and his extensive knowledge with us, and who's ultimately made possible both the book and the exhibition. And I'll send many thanks also to the University of Bergen Library, especially Library Director Maria Torres and Head of the Department of Special Collections, Björn Arvid Bagge, both of whom have gone out of their way to support the development and completion of this project, as well as photographer Marthe Tolnes, whom I think might be logged on today, who, among many other things, have digitized all the works for the book and the catalog. And outside our own institutions, we want to thank the amazing staff at Bergen City Museum, friends and colleagues at the Norwegian National Library, and at the venues we've been working with on the exhibition, which include the Norwegian Museum of Cultural History, the Brigham Young Museum of Art, the National Nordic Museum in Seattle, Towson University Art Galleries, and of course, Eckert Art Gallery and Gettysburg College Schmucker Art Gallery.
Okay, I also want to note that the project has been supported by generous grants from the Wyeth Foundation for American Art, the Fritt Ord Foundation, the U.S. Embassy in Oslo, and from the American Scandinavian Foundation. And we're also grateful for additional financial support from GeoFocus Engineers, the University of Bergen, and at Gettysburg College, the Civil War Institute, the History Department, and the Environmental Studies Program and EPAC. And special thanks too to Susan and Gerald Eckert for their sponsorship of this exhibition and for their related educational program support to Millersville University. And so it's been very collaborative, and also because this exhibition is tied to an understanding of place, particularly as it relates to how colonialism has led to the deaths and the forced assimilation of millions of Indigenous peoples, and how survivors have been violently displaced, mistreated, and misunderstood. We'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement for where I am at Gettysburg, and this is a very short video that I'd like to share. That has been endorsed by Gettysburg College.
As a member of the Gettysburg community, I respectfully acknowledge that Gettysburg College is on unceded Indigenous land, including the traditional homelands of the Susquehannock, Conestoga, Seneca and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Lenni Lenape, and Shawnee nations, and the connections of Indigenous peoples to this land continue today. We have a responsibility to honor these connections, and as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, we strive to understand our place within the past, present, and future of this Indigenous land by reflecting on our relationships with the human and other than human relatives with whom it is shared.
Okay, so Shannon is speaking today from, can you all see where I'm pointing around here? Whereas I'm over in Norway, in Tromsø, Romsa in the Northern Sami language, which is the largest city in Northern Norway. And I should say that this map is not quite to scale. The designer made Norway a little bit bigger than it is so that you could see some details in the map. So I want to point out in the line towards the bottom of Norway here between Bergen and Oslo, which is the Bergen Railway, a route that has been important both for the development of trade and tourism in Norway and also for our project. And in the US, you can see the line between San Francisco and sort of the end of Nebraska there, which is the Transcontinental Railroad, which opened in 1869. So those are some important places on the map.
Okay, so Marthe and I are going to be going back and forth in our presentation this evening, but first I want to explain how this idea of comparing Norwegian and American photographs first came about. So I wrote my dissertation years ago on American photographer Edward S. Curtis, who photographed Indigenous peoples in North America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And I have for a long time been teaching and writing about the history of American photography. In 2013, I was in Norway participating in an artist and writer's residency when I came across an exhibition in the window of the University of Bergen Library that featured work by Norwegian photographers Sofus Tromholt and Knut Knudsen. And I was struck immediately, both by how compelling and beautiful the photographs were, but also because they seemed to be somewhat similar in subject and style to Curtis's work. And here you can see two examples of Curtis's photos, his striking portrait on the right and a Pima home situated in the landscape on the left. So this was, when I first saw this window display, it was my last night in Norway for that trip. So I returned to Bergen a year later to start my research on these Norwegian photographers in the archives, and then came back the year after that, trying to formulate my thoughts about the significance of this comparison. Marthe then was the director of the picture collection, and she also, to my good fortune, was also interested in this idea, and to my delight, agreed to work with me to pursue an exhibition and to write and co-edit a book. And so because of Curtis, I started with a curiosity about the representation of Indigenous people in Norway and had questions about the correlations, influences, or overlapping practices between the photographs of the Sami and the Native Americans at the time. But of course, the histories of Indigenous peoples in Norway and the United States are not easily analogous. I also want to note that our larger project does not provide the important perspective of the Samis or Native Americans' experiences with the cultural encounters that we study, but the photographs we include in the project nonetheless attest to the presence and representations of Indigenous cultures and inhabited landscapes in this period.
So like Shannon, I'd also done work on images depicting Indigenous people. In my case, the Sami, who traditionally live in the Sapmi region, which includes the northern parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And historically, the reindeer herding Sami in particular, not all of them are reindeer herding, but those who do herd have particularly been subject to a number of changes to the national borders that Sapmi is situated across, and the four different nations had different and often very changing laws and policies concerning land ownership and language, which also very much concerned the Sami people. Despite various hostile and assimilationist policies, the Sami experienced nothing comparable to the extermination and systematic removal of Indigenous people from their native lands that occurred in the United States. And I think that's important to note. My work then was on the Danish scientist and Northern Lights researcher Sofus Tromholt, which Shannon mentioned, who's seen here in traditional Sami clothes on the left. Tromholt spent a year in 1882 in the Sami village of Kautokeino, where he was measuring the aurora as part of the first international polar year. But he also photographed the local landscape and people. And today his images are an invaluable source both for cultural and family history, especially up here in the northern region. And mine and Solveig Greve's book about Sofus Tromholt and his photographs in particular was published in 2018. So I was working on that book when me and Shannon first met. So although we each came to this project with a strong understanding of two photographers' encounters with Indigenous people, we wanted to expand beyond our individual areas of expertise and look at the broader histories of photography in each country. And we gathered a few experts to join us. They were Trond Bjorli and Toril Gjesvik in Norway, and Americans James Swenson and Elizabeth Hutchinson, and most importantly, Ron Perisho, who I've already mentioned as well. And Ron has a remarkable collection of 19th century American photographs, and he's worked closely with us and generously loaned these photographs or some of these photographs for the exhibition. He's also an expert in American photography, and this project really could not have been possible without his generosity and wealth of knowledge. And as you can see here in the pictures, we were all able to gather together in Norway a few summers back to look at photographic collections in Bergen and in Oslo. And it was this sort of coming together, which included an epic rail journey across Norway, that cemented the thesis for the exhibition and the structure of the book. And in the middle there, you can see me and James Swenson still very cheerful as our train had stopped due to sun kink. And none of us were so cheerful when we arrived several hours late in the middle of the night in Oslo.
So here we are now with two beautiful installations in Pennsylvania, each with about 50 different original photographs on display. And here on the left is Schmucker Art Gallery, on the right is Eckert Art Gallery. The exhibition is kind of as a whole and in each of the two iterations right now is loosely organized around 6 thematic sections. And Marthe and I tried to find not only the shared motifs between the works in Ron's collection and in the extensive archive at the University of Bergen, but also we wanted to consider how these similarities in composition opened up other comparisons about tourism and nationalist feelings about landscape. Our conversation turned to the relevance of these photographs for current concerns about the environment and how these photographs played a part in new infrastructure and the exploitation of natural resources. So this evening, we'd like to take you through just some of these pairings of Norwegian and American photographs.
So we'll start with these 3 railway views. And Norway's railways, or Norway's system of railways, is of course very different from the sprawling miles of track in the United States. However, the photographs nonetheless evoke a similar frontier aesthetic. So to the left, we got William Henry Jackson's Petrified Fish Cut, which illustrates the railway track making its way through a large rocky embankment. And it's almost identical to Axel Lindahl's Vossebanen at the top right. And Knut Knudsen photographed the same location as Lindahl, but from a slightly different viewpoint. Because as Lindahl situated his camera in the middle of the tracks, Knudsen moved to the right, and he also captured the telegraph line that makes its way from the hanging rock at the center of the composition and out of the frame. And Knudsen also included wooden fences and other built interferences in the landscape, such as wooden poles, rocks rearranged to keep the embankment steady, and the telegraph line that continues to another rock further down the track. American railroad photographs most often are interpreted in relation to increased access and exploitation of the West, and accessibility and engineering victories are the dominant narratives also in the Norwegian photographs. So each photograph champions the railroad engineers and the workers' ability to blast through rocks and mountainsides and to construct architecture and infrastructure in a rugged and seemingly unoccupied landscape.
And so the, excuse me, so the railway made possible increased opportunities for tourism. And whether or not tourists made their way to these scenic locations, the photographers were keenly aware of how to bring the views to international armchair travelers. So we're now looking here on the left at Edward Muybridge's photograph, Wildcat Falls, the Valley of the Yosemite, where a waterfall rushes toward the foreground. The photographer must have been perched precariously on one of the well-worn rocks that frame the falls. So you can see 2 wooden footbridges, which allow, right up here, which allow for a safe passage across and a thrilling look at the cascading water below. In Norway, photographer Knut Knudsen captured a nearly identical scene from a similarly low vantage point. The viewer peers up at a young man leaning on a wooden bridge spanning the Slettefossen waterfall in Romsdalen. The speed of the water was too great for Muybridge's and Knudsen's glass plates and cameras, so the falls appear in each photograph as a vaporous, hazy blur. And we want to note that this was taken before Muybridge figured out how to stop movement in his better-known animal locomotion studies. When Muybridge photographed Yosemite with a mammoth plate camera in 1872, landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted had already described the site as a, quote, union of deepest sublimity with the deepest beauty of nature. And he asserted that, quote, visitors have already come from Europe expressly to see Yosemite, end quote. And we found analogous fulsome language from Scottish traveler William Banks, who wrote about Romsdalen, the location of Knudsen's photograph, in his 1880 travel book to Iceland and Norway. In his words, he, quote, strolled on afterwards to the Sletafoss, where the river Rama precipitates itself through a narrow gorge and forms one of the finest of the waterfalls of the second magnitude, end quote. So in their promotion of these locations as spots for travelers from far away, Olmsted and banks like Muybridge and Knudsen were all part of a burgeoning tourism industry. Yet many of their readers and viewers may not have had the chance to encounter these rushing waterfalls and narrow gorges in person. So as man-made interventions in the landscape that make nearness to the falls possible, the bridges and Muybridge's and Knudsen's images, like the photographer's own practices, provide a dramatic proximity to a remote spot. These photographs, especially when the photographer positions himself in the midst of the falls, offer a new means of vicarious travel and exploration. It is important to mention that the photographers and the promoters of Yosemite made little mention of the Southern Sierra Miwok people, who were the original inhabitants of Yosemite and its surroundings.
So the notion of manifest destiny, understood as the conquering of the American West by white settlers with a claim to divine sanction, has been a common narrative in the creation and reception of much American landscape imagery. The photographic service and expeditions westward coincided with greater territorial expansion and increasing statehood in the West, as well as an effort to establish a sense of Americanness, notably at the expense of Native American lives, lands, and human rights. And Norway experienced a definitive nationalist movement between 1814, when Norway ceded from Denmark and established a constitution, and 1905, when it became an independent country, following 500 years of mostly being the weaker part of unions. In the wake of this burgeoning nationalism, romantic landscape painting came to symbolize a sense of identity in Norway. Norwegian romantic landscape painter Jesse Dahl, who was born in 1788, is considered the father of Norwegian painting, and Tidemann and Gude, who followed Dahl, are also credited with establishing the aesthetic language for Norwegian national romantic painting. And seen here in the lower left is Tidemann and Gude's best known work, which is a collaborative painting of a bridal party on the Hardangerfjord, which mimics Dahl's approach to the landscape and offers a romantic view of the mountains, glassy fjord, and also an idealized peasantry. American landscape painting, as seen in Albert Bierstad's Merced River, Yosemite Valley, follows similar motifs of the romantic sublime. And much previous scholarship in American art has focused on how landscapes reveal particularly American ideologies of expansion, the seeming availability of unoccupied frontiers, and the splendor of America's majestic mountains. And in Bierstad's painting, a group of indigenous figures can be seen in the foreground, and is thought that Bierstad was inspired by Carlton Watkins's earlier photographs of the Yosemite.
So in contrast to painting, which doesn't always demand the artist's presence at the scene, the photographers demonstrate both the physical prowess necessary to climb the mountain and the artistic savvy to skillfully capture a view that conjures notions of the divine. The photographers often incorporated figures in the landscape, perhaps to mimic early 19th century landscape painting, particularly the romantic motif of the Rücken figure seen in Caspar David Friedrich's paintings, such as the one down here on the right. Like Friedrich's figures, these solitary spectators function as proxies for the viewer and instruct us on where and how to look at a sublime view. The people in the pictures offer a kind of meditative encounter with the natural world. The viewer is often less concerned with the specific identity of the figures. But as in Friedrich's paintings, these photographs with their lonely wanderers seem to reflect a romantic belief in how this experience in nature can invoke greater mysteries and temporalities. So seen in contrast to the sense of the infinite and the timelessness suggested by the most inspiring sublime landscapes, it's important to remember that photography often assumes an immediacy and presentness of the photographer's experience that is passed along to its viewer. With the sense of a real physicality and attachment to truth in mind, the people in the landscapes also function as scientific markers. They establish a sense of scale in the vast terrain. These figures provide a way to gauge the height of the mountains, the expansive canyons, the size of rocks, and the plumes of glaciers and geysers. The figures are not just guides that mediate between the viewer and the scene, but suggest a more demanding and precarious relationship between the photographer and the mountaintop.
So in the exhibition, we've got a whole section that where we're talking about the photographer in the landscape. And it is perhaps due to my own background as a photographer that I'm particularly drawn to a number of photographs that are self-referential and that more directly illustrate the photographer's strengths and abilities to climb steep mountains, to transport heavy photographic equipment through like seemingly impassable lands, and to brave harsh weather. And Knudsen was interested in mountaineering, and he often traveled alone through the landscape using horse and cart, as seen here. Both Knudsen and Jackson, who's shown here with his mammoth plate camera, dealt with the challenges involved in the chemistry of photography, particularly the time spent to set up, to focus, prepare the chemistry on the plates, and fix the negatives in makeshift darkroom tents. And I've lost a page of my manuscript. Ooh, where is page 11? So they were doing all this like on mountaintops, in rowing boats, on mountain peaks. And the cumbersome collodion wet plate technology that Knudsen used reveals itself in a surprising number of images that include his darkroom tent and also other instances of photographic processes. And I should say that also in the collection, we see the traces as fingerprints on hundreds of glass plate negatives. And as you will have noted, if you've seen the actual exhibition, there are no mammoth plates by the Norwegian photographers, perhaps because they mainly traveled alone, whereas many of the American photographers were affiliated with larger government or railway service. And there is actually a physical limit to how much stuff you can lug around. And with a mammoth plate camera, you have mammoth glass plate negatives as well, and it gets very, very heavy. However, the physical and scientific efforts to be makers of and participants in the landscapes are nearly identical in the rugged terrain of both countries.
So we're very much aware of the gendered implications of these accounts of the physical difficulties of photographing and experiencing the landscapes, particularly on these Western surveys out west. And so we sought to find photographs that included women, hikers, camera operators, and spectators in both Norwegian and American photographs. So these women are exceptional in context with the masculine swagger that accompanies most accounts of travel across all these landscapes. But they're not alone. Another notable exception is English writer and feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, who traveled through Norway alone and wrote a phenomenal book about her adventure in 1796. But more common was the opinion of geological survey leader Clarence King, for instance, who denounced women who traveled to Yosemite Valley and believed that they could not adequately appreciate the landscape. Knowing that most of the figures depicted in Western landscapes are men, it is perhaps surprising to see two women scrambling up the side of the rough rock formation in A.J. Russell's Conglomerate Peaks at Echo, which is on the left. And here I'm gonna just circle them. This is in a bright white billowing dress. This is one woman who is facing Russell's camera. The other one is in the darker dress up here, higher up on the mountain. So this one woman who's facing the camera cannot be seen as a Friedrich-inspired Rückenfigur standing in for a supposedly male viewer, but instead is a dynamic participant in the landscape. And women did, in fact, travel to the West as part of surveys, ethnological research trips, and as photographers. And likewise, women engaged with the Norwegian landscape as active photographers, tourists, and mountaineers, as seen here in this photograph by Knudsen of a very well-known female mountaineer right here, scrambling up the side of this mountain.
And for those 19th century viewers who couldn't hike, but still wanted to immerse themselves in the landscape, they could experience the landscape views in 3D through stereoscopic cards, which is an experience that we've sought to replicate with the 3D presentation in the exhibition, which has been beautifully made with the help of Ron Perisho. And millions of stereo views were sold in the United States, Canada, and Europe of tourist destinations across the world. This was a hugely popular pastime, having these stereo viewers and looking at stereoscopic cards and kind of going into nature in 3D in their own homes. And individual photographers, photographic publishing firms, and booksellers distributed stereo views and albumen prints widely. In addition to seeing views in the private context of one's home, views of Norwegian landscapes were also presented as stereopticon views and lantern slides in public lectures by American travelers, scholars, and writers in the United States. And interestingly, in this newspaper account of a lecture on Norway given at the American Museum of Natural History in New York in 1886, the writer states that one Professor Bickmore, quote, spoke of the beauty of the country and compared the National Valley to that of Yosemite, unquote.
So related to this international exchange of stereoscopic cards in the 19th century is the arguably bigger and more spectacular demonstration of cross-cultural connectivity, the World's Fair. These expositions provided visitors with a new international understanding of the world. American and Norwegian landscape photographs were seen at 19th century World's Fairs in national pavilions, displays related to manufacturers, as well as halls dedicated solely to photography. The photographs were used to demonstrate national identity and the achievements of each country, as well as a way to consider aesthetic similarities among works of art and industry. The Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876 was perhaps the first documented occasion that both Norwegian and American photographs were displayed in the same exhibition. And so here in the upper left is an illustration of the photographic hall at the Centennial Exposition, where a viewer would have seen many of the photographs that we have included in the exhibition, including works by Timothy O'Sullivan, Carlton Watkins, and Knud Knudsen. In the upper right is a photograph of Charles Leander Weed's display at this exposition. And even though the photographic hall in Philadelphia limited its number of international photographers, Knudsen's landscape views were presented in the hall alongside large displays by the prominent American photographers. And he was exceptionally successful at these exhibitions. In Philadelphia in 1876, for example, Knudsen received an award for his landscapes. And seen here in the lower right is a detail from one of Knudsen's sales albums where he stamped the awards he received at various World's Fairs. And Philadelphia is kind of center left. It's right here. You can see Philadelphia. So these stamps are also seen in the advertisement in the lower left for his photographic studio in Bergen. And you'll note that the ad is in English and in German, therefore indicating the international reach of his photographs and their appeal to wide audiences. Knudsen may not have traveled with his photographs to all of these expositions in the 1870s and 1880s, but he participated and saw the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. And I like to think that given the striking compositional similarities of the landscapes, we can presume that attendees to World's Fairs strolling from one display to the next made connections among the views, and that personal collections of stereo cards of Norwegian fjords and mountains were shuffled alongside scenes of Yosemite or Yellowstone. And really a main point of the World's Fairs was to see cultural practices through a comparative global perspective. And like our exhibition, to find analogies among the nationalities, despite other differences in geography and culture.
So we're going to conclude in not too long, but I would like to say a few words on the project and its significance. Because across the West toward the North has been an ambitious project, not only for us and Ron Perisho as curators and image custodians, but also thematically and in its scope. Just want to point out that to the left here, we see some of the researchers gathered in Oslo in 2018. So a couple of years into mine and Shannon's process. And then to the right, you see Morten Heiselberg documenting framed works in Bergen 2 years later. So this has really been several years in the making before we sit here and present to you today. And all together, the exhibition, which is currently in 2 parts, includes 120 original framed works from 3 collections. It includes the 40 image presentation that you can view with 3D glasses, as well as a selection of albums, photographic equipment, postcards from the tail end of the period that we're concerned with, and other items that we curate especially for the various venues where we show the exhibition. And the last time an exhibition including Norwegian 19th century works was shown in the US on anything like the same scale was in the 1980s. And really, this is the first major survey of the connections, both contemporary and seen through the lens of time, between American and Norwegian 19th century landscape photography. And without having actually seen any of the exhibitions myself yet, due to this little pandemic, I'm quite proud of what we've accomplished with the exhibition and the book as a group. And I really look forward to more work being done on this topic as a result of Across the West as well.
And so given the scale of the project and the limited time available today, we're not able to go through all of the themes and connections that we have discovered and discussed in the show. And I'm just sort of thinking of all the things I wish I could share tonight. But very briefly, I just want to mention that one of our central interests is how the photographs engage with modernity in the form of industrial development and reverence. For example, in both of these photographs shown here, a coal mining town that popped up in Utah on the left and photographed by Andrew J. Russell, and a timber factory in Norway on the right, taken by Axel Lindahl, demonstrate the significance of natural resources, not just to a nation's economic growth, but also as the tourist destination in its own right. So for instance, Russell's photograph was published in the lavish album titled The Great West Illustrated, which aimed to increase railway travel in the West. And Lindahl's photograph shows that this factory has touristic appeal to a well-dressed couple. And so we're mindful about how these early efforts to celebrate industrialization relate to today's rapidly changing environment. For a number of the photographers in the show, the link to current debates on land use and climate change is a direct one, as they are being utilized in a variety of rephotographic projects made in the context of art, science, or a combination of those, both in the United States and Norway. The rephotographic project's efficacy is dependent upon the photographic pairings of old and new. And these juxtapositions can be seen as parallel to the pairings of here and there of this project.
So we're going to end here with actually one of my personal favorites from the exhibition. It's by Knut Knudsen, and it actually shows the farm where he was born and grew up, and that he maintained close links to all his life. So I just wanted to include that in this presentation. And over the years, Shannon and I have had the pleasure of vicariously traveling to many of these places that we've seen in the exhibition, far past and present. But now, more than ever, we've traveled to these through the images when trips have been canceled and we're all only armchair travelers. And through these beautiful remote landscapes across the west and toward the north, we've considered how wildernesses were discovered, as it were, resources were consumed, and tourists and immigrants followed new tracks. Now, the original photographs not only revealed the environmental consequences of these efforts and exploits, they also serve as reminders of the precarious balance of nature and culture, of inhabitation and exploitation, conservation and destruction everywhere. Thank you.
Thanks. So we purposefully tried to leave time for questions and comments. And I've had the privilege and pleasure of kind of talking about the exhibition with Ron Perisho. So he's here tonight, and he always does a lovely job. I don't want to put him on the spot, but a lovely job of also helping us to answer questions. For those of you who are in Gettysburg or are willing to drive the hour west from Millersville, I also want to invite you all to come to Schmucker Art Gallery for a talk on October 22nd at 4 o'clock. Ron will be speaking in the gallery about some of the works of his works in the show, and we'll have a reception following that talk until 6 o'clock. But I will, I'm going to stop the share so we can maybe see some questions. I also want to note that Heidi will help to moderate the chat too. Okay, Patrick has a question.
Oh, I'm not muted anymore, am I? I've had trouble with that in the past.
Yeah, you're there.
I went to see the Gettysburg exhibition today, actually. I picked up the booklet and toured the pictures. I was struck by, well, the beauty, yes, but also the whole time when I was looking at this, I was wondering how much have they changed from the time they were taken. How much have the scenes changed from the time they were taken to where they're in present state today? And I was just curious. I guess it's not really open the questions, I guess.
I can have a stab at that.
Yeah, and I think we were hoping for that question. So
yep.
So you can start, and I'll try to find one of our slides that we
and
have
I'm guessing
back pocket.
You are going to take us to a rephotographic survey slide, because the easy and difficult answer is that some of these landscapes have changed immensely, and some of them have not changed so much at all. And there are photographers today who have it as their work to travel to these places, find the exact spots, the exact GPS coordinates for where they think the 19th century photographers were, and re-photograph the places. And as you can see, Oskar Puschmann here in Norway has done a lot of this type of work, following Axel Lindahl in particular, and Anders B. Wilse. And a lot of the changes that he's discovered are to do with vegetation. In the 19th century, there were more agriculture. The land was used completely different from today. So there's a lot of vegetation appearing where there was none back in the 19th century. Also wood that was used for firewood and for building that contributed to erosion, which is now being sort of that the land is being built over again. So that's one of the changes that's happening. Other changes are glaciers. Several of Knudsen's pictures have been used in glacier research. And Tyrone Martinsson has been working particularly on Svalbard, on both 19th century photographs, but also earlier maps and drawings, to see how the glaciers have changed over centuries, which is a really interesting project. And the glaciers are constantly moving back and forth, but I think he wouldn't disagree with me if I say that most of them they've shrunk. They've not really grown a lot, even though they might have periods where they appear larger and periods where they appear smaller. Shannon, did you want to? Did you want to fill me in, Shannon?
No, that was great. Yeah, and I apologize for the poor quality of this slide on the right. But similar rephotographic survey projects were done in the US in the late 70s, and then I think again in the early 2000s. So it's been about 20 years, but they've gone back. And I think too, what's interesting too is even that there's obviously a big difference between the 19th century and the 20th, late 1970s, but even within the past, 20 and 40 years. I think it's striking to see.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
My question. I first played it forth also because of I've seen the drought in the California region. One picture in particular, when you come into Gettysburg, is of a bridge going in a tunnel, railroad trestle in a tunnel. It reminded me of a shot I saw of a California reservoir in which all of that is underwater, but now it's being exposed because of the drought. So
that's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Okay, Nathaniel.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering, there was a place on the Gettysburg College campus where I could see some of these photographs. Is that part of it?
That's right.
Okay.
So, yeah,
right,
so Schmucker Art Gallery, which is just the ground floor, the first floor of Schmucker Hall.
All right, I was just checking. I thought I saw that on the website.
Oh yeah.
I've been pretty busy, but after seeing some of the photographs here, I was thinking about checking that out. So thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, and we're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Renee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Professor Egan. Since I'm taking your course, and I just have like let's say it's a deeper question, but I would like to know, why do you think people of the two nationalities have such a different interpretations of the landscape photography? So as you mentioned in the beginning, a central aesthetic, people are the central idea that people are pursuing is the beauty, to find the beauty of the mountains, of the sceneries. But why do you think people have, why do you think people from the two nationalities have such a different interpretations in the later development of landscape photography? I mean, did I say that clear?
Okay, so I'm going to try to sum up your question and then toss it to Marthe. So you're asking a little bit more specifically what we mean by kind of nationalism, how national identity is expressed through the photographs. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So that's a big question, and one that we this is something we tried to tackle. I'm happy to chat with you about this in class on Friday, but I'm going to bounce it to Marthe. Maybe she can speak to kind of a general sense of Norwegian national identity in the 19th century and why that was so important.
Yeah, I think that would be a really helpful question to my essay specifically. Yeah.
That is a huge question, I have to say. It is what we're trying to investigate with the whole exhibition, I would say. But in terms of Norway, I mean, Norway was in a bit of a minority position in unions for several hundred years. And in 1814, we ceded from Denmark and sort of started the route to becoming our own country. And in that process, Norwegians started looking at their own landscape, looking at what is it that makes us different from the Danes, for example. And Denmark is a very flat little country, whereas Norway is a mountainous, very long country. So that's a huge, I mean, now I'm very, very simplifying things here, I should say. But that's, you know, that's a very a striking difference, and something that people could latch onto and say, oh, this is something that makes us very special. We've got these mountains. What can we use them for? We used to think that they were just a hindrance to getting from A to B, a hindrance for resource extraction. Is it possible that they actually have some value anyways? Yes, it is possible, and we can use them, we can enjoy them, we can go out in them, we can take walks in them, we can look at them, and we can be proud of them. So that is one of the sort of ways that the national romantic notion manifest. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that, actually, because it is such a huge question.
Yeah, so one of the things we're interested in is this, there's this like big cultural push toward trying to define and identify a kind of Norwegian national identity through painting, through music, through literature. And then also in the United States, we are really focusing on photographs that were taken in the immediate aftermath of the American Civil War, when there's also very much an interest in kind of reconciliation and building back a union and thinking about, again, a kind of a unified Americanness. And so we saw those two strands, which are very, very different and motivated by very different political concerns and obviously very different political conflicts, but they are kind of expressing themselves photographically, I think, in similar ways.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think because Norway is so famous for like the natural landscape, I think that is also like one of the factors that every people from Norway, like they really do, like they hold that like deep in heart. I think that would be like one of the reasons. But thank you for answering, and thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks for asking, Renee.
Thank you.
So
I can see that.
Yes.
Yeah. I can see that somebody has posted that it's cool there. It's 3D glasses, and I will just wholeheartedly support. I think that's Patrick who said that. The 3D glasses presentation is indeed very cool.
I have to say, I've been able to go through the exhibition with a number of classes so far, and we walk, we look, we talk, and we look at the details. But as soon as you put on those glasses, you see details that are difficult to see in the frames. And usually I'm not a huge fan. I always kind of encourage people to see original images. I love original images, but in this instance, the 3D viewing experience really is immersive and spectacular in a way that that blows me away. And I see other people too, just really like surprised by how fun it is.
And I can mention for those who are maybe not so familiar with that type of photography, that when the photographers very often had cameras with different plate sizes, so that they could, the size of the plate determined the size of the print that they made. And with the stereo photographs, they had to photograph in a completely different way. So not only did they have to use different plates, they also had to view their motif in a different way. They had to make sure that they had a foreground, a middle ground, a background, so that you had something to to actually create that 3D effect.
Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't just set up the camera and photograph the exact same motive as they photograph something else. They had to rethink their whole composition and make sure that this would actually work for the viewer in 3D as well. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of the stereo views.
And Ron has generously loaned not one, but two stereoscopic cameras, one for each of our exhibitions, as well as 19th century stereo holders. And one thing that Ron had mentioned to me is the savvy of taking off the lens caps, the two lens caps of the camera at the same time. And that it's, as Marthe said, setting up the scene, thinking about the scene stereoscopically, but also being, getting the timing right too. And I think Patrick has his hand raised again.
Yes, I have my hand raised. Sorry.
Go ahead.
You might have just answered the question. I was wondering if the three-dimensional glasses are like the stereo, do they compare to the stereoscopic, am I pronouncing that right, lenses, and how you view them, the pictures? Was it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I'll try to answer it briefly, but Ron or Marthe, if you want to chime in. So the experience is similar, but the technology is different.
Good answer.
Okay, so so what Ron did, and again, if I'm getting this wrong, please hop on. But the stereoscopic cards are those two images that you saw, right? The two images side by side, and if you stick it into a holder with two, eye holes, it looks like it's in 3D. What we did, or what Ron did, was scan those two images, and one is tinted red and one is tinted blue, and then presented on the screen. And when you wear the red and the blue glasses, the images, you can see your brain and your eye communicate with each other in a way where you can experience, you see it three-dimensionally. I know that there's optical science, but to me it seems like magic.
It does seem like magic. It just pops out. The one that I liked the best was of you were in a cut. You were standing on the tracks and you're looking down into the tunnel, and it can turn from two-dimensional to three-dimensional, and you could move around and you could see where things were in the foreground and where were in the background. Very, I'm sorry, I can't remember the word, but I thought that was probably one of the better parts of the exhibit.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks. Okay. Like I said, if anyone is shy about speaking on camera, we're happy. You're welcome to ask a question in the chat. Otherwise, we'll give it another minute. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes after the formal presentation. If you'd like to chat a little bit more informally, I can turn off the recording. And I think I will do that now. So with that, I just want to say thanks